Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult video 145, Occult Thoughts on Animals, Environmentalism, and so forth. Animals and nature in general are venerated in the more occult pagan side of spirituality. I know within Abrahamism, animals, usually they're referred to within the context of just property. If there's any symbolism there, it's more scant. They're not really used as human archetypes or appreciated in any wider sense. For instance, Mesoamerican pagans, which they were, pagan groups, venerated animals. If they hunted an animal, they'd give thanks, and they venerated nature, or sort of Mother Nature in a general sense. Or they've got the Great Father, sort of the creator figure. But then you've also got these various natural forces, spirits, and so forth. There is an inherent urge within mankind to overlap the spiritual with the natural, I think. This leads to alchemy, certainly as the precursor to modern natural science, within both a chemical and biological sense, as well as other things, agriculture. You look at early sort of the quack medicine, you could call it, era. People are using all sorts of herbs and roots and things to cure all of their ailments. That's where modern medicine stems from, although it's heavily modified in the modern sense. But when we're talking about animals within a spiritual context, perhaps the most authentic use of them is the idea that man wants to emulate their good characteristics. Therefore, you have the idea of the berserker, the berserker. And the animals sort of wearing the pelts, being a wild man, strong in battle. You want to absorb the qualities, the characteristics of a bear or a wolf or something like that. You have these sort of animalistic cults that spring up that use this various iconography related to animals. There's a reason even things like the dragon, mythical animals strictly, or the unicorn are used within the same context. Therefore, we have the lion as emblematic of the English people. We have all these other animals, the Chinese dragon. It overlaps with nationalism, certainly. Each nation could consider itself to be resembled by the archetype of some creature or another, whether, again, mythological or not. You look at the United States with the sort of inherently pagan trappings of the symbology used at our founding and through up until the late pre-modern period anyway. You have the iconography of the goddess Columbia, a very paganized figure. Has nothing to do with Jesus, it has to do with Americanism. You have the eagle, certainly, although it was suggested that the turkey should have been used variously. I believe that it's actually a myth that Ben Franklin wanted the turkey to be used as a figure of the U.S. He was making, I believe, a joke at the time when he suggested that. I believe it was a joke about politics, if I remember correctly. So it overlaps with everything. Within the Abrahamic paths, within Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, it's funny because modern adherents thereof, they have their pets or they have their animals and, scritchy scratch their heads and do cute little words to their pet cat or dog or whatever. No dogs within Islam, of course, but you know what I mean. They look at them as cute and fluffy, and they take care of them sometimes better than they take care of themselves, and you have like crazy old cat ladies and stuff like that. But within the dogmatic context, the animal is either property or it's just used basically as a sacrifice. Its only usefulness to man within the Judaistic context is to take sin off of the human with a blood offering, of course, in even older times within Judaism. There was the killing of the cow and the reading of the entrails, which is a very paganized practice too. It was used certainly within a Hellenistic context as well, sort of forsaken over time in favor of perhaps less harmful cultic activities, because then they have their oracles and things of that nature. There's not necessarily the true necessity of a blood sacrifice in such context. Maybe it's just the oracle goes over into a cave and starts hallucinating and spews out some random jumbled words and says, oh yeah, be on your way. There's your friggin' fortune. Now please pay the temple some gold or silver or something. Leave us a nice alabaster case, and I will tell you what will befall you. Somebody will be killed. Who? You have to determine that for yourself, but I'm inevitably going to be right. You'll die of old age at some point, old man. It sucks to be you. Haha, you got swindled, basically. So animals, I see as highly spiritual. Now, this overlaps somewhat with environmentalism. Of course, if you have a world that's heavily polluted and screwed up, the occult suffers as the result of that. The occult, in the more authentic sense, relies upon nature. Paganism, certainly. If there are no wild places for you to go and be in solitude, that's a spiritual experience that you're lacking. People, I've compared before, for instance, the sort of urban and rural types of occultism that I see. And I see them as separate. Now, the rural occultists can push their material in a technocratic manner with the internet, using sort of the trappings of urbanization, just as urban individuals. They can go on a retreat or something. They go for a week or a month or whatever out of each year to go be in nature and pretend to be wild people, usually with an RV, which is rather sad that they think that that's roughing it. Oh, we still got electricity and heat and everything else. We just build the fire for show and ate some hot dogs. It was really good camping experience. That's not really the way that you should be doing it if you want it within a spiritual context. You should be gobbling down some of those mushrooms or something. Disclaimer, of course. That's just tongue-in-cheek and I'm joking. But there is a difference between the two. The way in which people who enjoy or are part of the rural life of the world, the way in which they experience the spiritual is different from people who live in highly developed, very urban areas where they're in constant proximity to people and glowing lights. Instead, they never see the night sky. Even within an astrological context, there's a big difference between the sky as it's witnessed by someone living in New York City and somebody living in upstate New York in the middle of the mountains. There's going to be a huge difference between the two. Even here, where I live in a semi-rural area on the outskirts of a small town, even here, it's different from someone who's truly living in the middle of nowhere as far as what they witness around them. The greater or lesser absence of nature around a person affects their spiritual beliefs, I believe. To a great degree, probably to the greatest degree of all. It's not just because of their way of life lending itself more to being skeptical about the spiritual in more of an education-related context or something like that. It's even the same, for instance, within Islam. People who live under one cultural situation, a very developed, more secular state secularity, church and state don't mix, they can't really fully appreciate or understand the more zealous style of Islam practiced by most Muslims in the world. Just as somebody living in a developed city within the Middle East itself won't necessarily understand the more folkish ways of people who live out in the middle of the steppe, some nomadic tribe that practices the same religion on paper, but in a cultural and a behavioral sense, it's totally different. There's going to be a different appreciation for nature, a different importance of nature. It's sort of like the you always want what you can't have thing. Somebody who lives in an urban area, to take full command of their spiritual vocabulary, goes out into the wilderness to rough it for a while to have a spiritual experience. Somebody who is in a more natural setting, someone who's more rural, may enjoy occasionally visiting the big city, the same way somebody from the big city occasionally goes camping or something like that. There's a big interplay here where people seek that which is not around them. That's an innate human tendency. It's sort of the what leads people to explore and adventure hundreds of years ago. Of course, there's nowhere to adventure to now unless you intend to storm the South Pole or go wander off into the Gobi Desert or maybe what little's left of the Congolese Basin's rainforest or something like that. Some high mountain jungle in the middle of Peru. Other than that, there's not a whole lot of the natural world left in a lot of parts of the world. Here, we've got it easy. Here in the on the eastern seaboard of the United States, most of our forests have come back, so it's a bit more spiritual, I think. I think it really does have something to do with how spiritual the population is. The more nature that's around them, the more appreciation they can have for this. This imparts both a moral complex and the more strictly spiritual, as well as superstition. You get more superstition in a rural population. Now, urban superstition is really to, oh, this place is haunted, this old asylum, this factory that's abandoned or something. They look at the decay around them of the urban back into the rural as it gets overgrown and screwed up, and they equate that with spirituality. That's not a coincidence. It's not a coincidence that if you go to a big city, the places that are supposedly haunted, they have a tendency to be abandoned. They have a tendency to be reverting back to a fallow nature. You look at Detroit, with large swaths of the city regressing back into literal wilderness. Beavers are now there for the first time in over 100 years on the outskirts of Detroit. All of those weird urban tales are spawned in those abandoned regions. It's not spawned in some place that's well lit, well trafficked, very high human energy, a lot of people in proximity. That's not the place that spooks people. That's not the place that spawns spiritual tales. It's the degradation of that urbanization that really does. And then it takes on usually a negative sense. Within the context of animals is a different way in which they're treated. In an urban context, or I should say in a developed context, animals are treated generally as just doting pets. You give them a bowl of food, change the cat box, take the dog out for a walk in the park and call it nature. It's laughable. The Central Park is nature, something like that. Within a rural context, of course, those animals, they can be more free, generally speaking. And then there are also wild animals around you. You know, the raccoons that wander around here are a little bit different from the hordes that wander around New York City and root through people's trash and hope that the tourists will throw them breadcrumbs or something like that. Yeah. Have people in some big cities ever even seen a wild growing tree? Some of them haven't. Every tree that they've ever seen within their city is meticulously planted and cared for. It's basically it's human influence on that scale as well. There is no real nature for somebody who lives in New York City, somebody who lives in Chicago or Tokyo or Detroit or something like that. Well, Detroit would be an aside. There is actual nature there in some of the bad neighborhoods. Now, I'm not sure how much you'd want to do too much exploration in those woods. But yeah, there's just a little bit about it. Just some general rambling thoughts about the basic idea of nature, animals, and environmentalism. I believe in protecting the environment, not to say I care about the climate accord that we just didn't sign on to or any of that crap. But picking up trash, cleaning up waste sites, trying to keep things clean, protecting animals to the base. I mean, it creates an immoral population. If you tell people that it's okay to abuse animals, and it doesn't matter if you're like throwing them on a barbecue griller, that's going to be an immoral population. They're going to lack, it's going to be like Sodom and Gomorrah. They're going to lack spirituality if you have that. People mistreating plants too, I would say, oh yeah, just clean cut all these trees. They're in the way of our condominium development or something. Now, I wouldn't call that moral. I would call that degrading. Humiliating, actually, to the human race, that sort of thing is taken as on a token, that it's acceptable to do such things. I think it's negative for the world, has wider ramifications for people's moral development, even in the more secular sense. You're teaching them that exploitation is just fine. What are they going to do when they apply that same logic to the rest of the human population? Probably not the greatest thing in the world. That's about all. Peace out.